Okay, Owethu, so you've worked with us for a few months. I've been away. We've all come back from what feels like the school holidays, and the market is kicking back into gear. So you've had about 3 months of working with us in an intern junior position. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take you through a few sections of questions. And each of these sections will talk about a different part of working with us or your development and your growth. So what I wanted to start with was questions about your arrival, what it felt like to join us. And people have said in the past when they interned with us that it didn't feel like the typical kind of drawing firm or draftsman drawing environment, and that it was a different environment. So my first question is leading into this. Take us back to your first week with us. What did you expect this internship to look like, and what did it actually look like? What was it actually like?
I expected to, from the get-go, to do a lot of work, which I think was the weird thing for me, because in my past experiences, that what it was like.
Yeah.
So, when I got here, it was more of learning while earning. So it was benefiting me while I'm growing as a person. So I think it wasn't what I had expected, what I've had in mind. Because I did do research of the studio beforehand.
And specifically for us as a studio, we tend to use software very diligently, and like specifically we choose to use a certain software over a different type of software. And when we talk about 3D software, we talk about SketchUp versus Rhino or Revit or AutoCAD. When we talk about 2D design software, we talk about Affinity and Canva versus the likes of the Adobe suites. And we introduced you to those kind of softwares, right? So how long did it take for you to go, okay, I'm actually in a learning position while I'm earning, but at the same time, the expectations that are put on me aren't so high that I need to immediately deliver on certain things?
Yeah, I think not setting high expectations was what benefited me a lot, because in my mind, I just had to prove myself. Because at some point I felt like I was really, really slow. Because I had Tanil waiting for my part of the work to be done. So it was kind of that thing. And it was also a supportive environment.
Yeah.
So which was, I think, a huge benefit, because it helped me learn and try to prove myself just for the fact that you'll have patience with me.
Yeah.
While learning new softwares.
Yeah. And just so that the viewer of the interview also understands, Tanil is a senior designer that works in our team, and we're generally a studio of 4 or 5 people, depending on how many interns are coming through the place. And so when you sit in a group of designers, you pick up the pace, like you say. You weren't too sure if you were fast enough. So you felt with the help of Tanil and myself that you were learning how to do something faster, or you were learning how to use the software.
I was learning how to basically do something faster and to use the software.
Yeah. Yeah, and interestingly, before you joined in an intern position at the start of this year, someone like Tanil, who's got a few years experience behind her name, she joined in the middle of last year and had a similar learning curve as you, where her previous position was very Revit focused, and now she was being pulled more towards the world of SketchUp. Okay, for section 1, I just wanted to ask a few more little details. So you've described yourself in some of the other interviews that you've done as someone who's more of a software person than a design person. And did you realize that while you were studying, or did you realize that while you were working?
It started while I was studying, because I really enjoyed 3D softwares.
Oh yeah.
Revit, ArchiCADs. Yeah, I really enjoyed 3D softwares from the get-go, more than the design parts. So I think even going on to like work experience, it's what I also realized that I'm much faster and I have much more knowledge of softwares as a whole, and I learn softwares faster than design principles, which was also a thing that I did realize over here in the studio, was that I liked more the parts of AI and the part of modeling than actually sitting and designing.
Yes, it is. Okay. In the PhD interview that you shared with me, so for the viewer, Owethu recently did an interview as part of a PhD project, where the PhD interviewer was specifically asking you questions about the reality of working in a studio or in an architectural firm versus what you learn in university. And you explained to her in your interview with her that what you were experiencing in the firms was not necessarily what you had expected to be your role. So your role was either changing or your role wasn't what you expected. What was that like in our studio?
I think it was also around the same lines, because I think like I automatically get into a specific corner, I automatically get into a specific position of what I benefit more in. So like, for example, in this studio, at the start of my internship, I was doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But ended up on the AI and experimenting side at the end, because it's what my mind was more focused into growing in more. And I think that you did kind of support me into pushing and learning more of that side of myself.
Yeah. So also the month that we've worked with you, there have been a few projects that have been like key projects in that time. And we as a studio normally take on projects that last somewhere between a couple of weeks and up to maybe 3 to 6 months. And so the project that you worked on longest is the one that went live actually this last Friday. When we're done here, I'll show you some photos. But that project, also for the viewers' interest, was a commercial project where people were purchasing or are purchasing cellular devices inside a store. And so what we were developing was a store within a store. There was a small section of a store and dedicated to hardware, dedicated to physical goods. And the physical goods were mostly cellular devices from a multitude of brands. And so you were part of that whole modeling process, which was a complex process, even for a studio of our size with 5 people. We at some point had 3 or 4 people involved, which we normally tend to have one or 2 people involved on a project. And so one of the key things was client asking, make sure that every cellular device that is on that stand, on that store in a store, is actually the actual device, right? And then we spent a lot of time modeling there. And then, like you're saying, we then pulled you out of that when that came to an end, and we started focusing on the AI. So now you were in a sense trusted with the AI, right? Not many people in the studio, apart from myself, were investigating how AI can be used to model something for you. Oftentimes we tend to use AI to create a relatively realistic render, right? It doesn't require you to do all the fine tuning and the tweaking that you would normally do in a big software, in a render environment. And what we were doing, you and I were busy with modeling something. So maybe just to summarize that for yourself, what out of all the things that you did in our studio felt like something that you were trusted with before you were necessarily ready? Or felt ready?
Before I felt ready, I think it was that commercial project that you are mentioning.
Yeah.
Because it also was a lot of pressure on our side as a studio to complete it and meet the deadline. So as a person who was not fast enough and who was learning as I was going, and I was picking up things and mistakes that I was doing as I was going, and we also have to submit, it was also like quite a lot of pressure. So I feel like I was not yet ready to take on that, but I was trusted to take on that, which was pretty positive.
Yeah.
So.
And did you feel like a person like Tennille or myself was available for you to help you if things would go wrong? Like, yes, you were given the responsibility to draw certain things and to arrange those things. Then did you still feel like Tennille was there, for example, as a person who could take the final responsibility?
Yeah, I feel like she has been supervising all of
Yeah. So there's almost been a bit of a safety net to what you've done, even though the work that you have done is the work that is eventually submitted. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so in the second section, I want to dive into the university versus the real studio. So a little bit of what this PhD student was talking to you about. We're now talking about the university versus the real studio. This was something the PhD student was also talking to you about. So you've had experience working with us and some other design firms. And you said when you left varsity behind, that you felt like you needed to be where you were at the time software wise, and so you were ready to enter the market to work in a professional environment because you had the knowledge of the software of Revit. And so then when you then enter your first job and you are confident in using Revit, you then start, of course, and then you start to pick up things that you're like, oh, we never were taught this, or they taught this to us in a certain way, but now that we're working in this firm, they do it slightly different or totally different. So were there any tools missing, or the depth in certain tools that were maybe missing, or was it maybe the way that you were taught that you later realized like this is not at all the way it's done in these practices?
I think it's mostly we were just taught the longer way, the longer known ways. Rather than teaching us like setting up your templates this way that would make everything like way faster.
Yeah. Okay, so I get that point, and I feel like I've maybe in the last 10 years spent 6 years now refining templates, right? So it took me about 3 to 4 years to go, okay, I'm designing things, this is the design language that I'm using, this is how the firm behaves, this is how our client expects things from us. And then you start reviewing your own work, and then by extension your own process. And then you realize I could do this much faster, or I could do this in a way that there actually is a template to what I do, because sometimes that's not even clear in the beginning. Yeah, that's important, but I think also to reassure other people who are leaving varsity behind or university behind, don't feel too pressurized to understand all of that. It's not, I don't think it's expected, especially not when you enter here, that you should know all the templates. But there should be enough time, like you explained to me in the beginning, there should be enough time where we explain to you how our process works. Yeah. So one of the corporate firms that we work with on, I would say, almost a day-to-day basis is a firm that has a 3 to 6 month onboarding with most of their staff. Now, for smaller organizations, that sounds ludicrous. It sounds insane. How can you take 6 months to train a person on how to do what they need to do? But at the same time, for such a big corporate environment, they have very specific ways of doing something, what you and I would call templates, right? And then they take 6 months to do that. Whereas I think in our environment, after 2-3 weeks, we hope that you've picked up most of the templates, right? And then the second month that you work with us, Like, okay, Owethu, please use that template and go do those things. And then there's still guidance, obviously, that you need, but we're starting to expect a little bit more. Okay, so then when you started to learn and see some templates here, and how we use those templates, and sometimes also how we refined our templates, because we're in a constant state of development when it comes to that. We don't take a template for granted in that way. And some templates might change on a month-to-month basis, or are refined on a month-to-month basis. For that kind of work, did you need to teach yourself how to get used to templates? Because it wasn't really taught you at the university then.
Yeah. I think you have to, I think it's mostly assisted by the people already working there.
Yeah.
So just asking questions really like goes a long way rather than trying to figure out something yourself.
Yes.
But like trying to figure out something yourself might take like 30 minutes rather than asking. That thing could be solved in like a few minutes. So I think asking is what helped me a lot.
Asking is helpful, yes. Yeah, asking is definitely helpful. And then if you sort of juxtaposition that against someone like Mbogeni in our firm, he's known to always ask ChatGPT first before he asks me or asks anyone else. So did you find that there's a healthy balance in our studio between asking a person or asking a knowledge base, like an AI, to try and figure things out?
Yeah, it's what I also like would do on my own.
It's what you're doing on, yeah.
Yeah, rather than constantly asking a person, because we are like a studio of like 5 people, so there's only so many people you can keep bothering and asking. So sometimes sometimes it's just gonna be you. And then if you compare it to the other places that you work, do you always feel like you can ask questions in the places that you've worked? Yeah, I've always been given the space to ask.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Then, if you could design one software module for architecture students, what would a week look like to learn software at a university from the things that you've learned in the different studios that you've worked?
I think like learning how to set up templates properly would also like benefit. Because we at some point had a problem like at our first week, like with when we were told to update the templates. So we kind of also had an issue. Oh, how do I update the template and reload it in another project? So it was like also that kind of issue. So I think I wouldn't necessarily focus on learning the tools of the software rather than applying it to you would of course need to apply it to projects, but I would focus on learning the tools properly, because I've also been recently like teaching myself SketchUp and teaching myself Revit. I've also recently learned that there's like so much more you can do with these softwares than what I've been doing. So I think like sort of unlocking that side and also the side of applying AI to the softwares would like help a lot.
Yeah, I think it is really, as you said, it's useful, and it should be mandatory in universities that you can apply software to a certain problem, and that's useful in itself. But you should also have the time to use the software and learn it without necessarily an immediate application to a problem. So yes, you can learn the software by using it to change a template, but you must also learn the software to build a template from scratch, or to build a template for a specific use case and then change it to another use case and then learn it in an abstract way. Okay. And when you finished your work at university, you had finished your degree on a final project, on like a master's thesis kind of project. And so how does that project that you finished on at university compare to a real life project in a studio?
Yeah, I feel like it's also the time that we are given in like a real life studio, because you also have to take into consideration that it also affects like real life people in real life environment. So you also have to keep that in your mind, that a mistake on your side doesn't only affect you and your marks, it affects like real actual people. So I think that was like the major difference. Because another thing that I also have realized, that in a real life studio, it's you're doing to save time and to produce what fits best for the client while saving time. Rather than in school, you're trying to do everything properly and you're trying to do everything accurately, while in a real life studio, you only, for that particular project or that particular stage of the project, you're just doing what the client will see, because the client won't go around your model and inspect your model, because the client doesn't understand the software. So compared to in school, you had the lecturer having your Revit file or your CAD file and inspecting if you did everything accurately. So I think,
and that does make sense. I think it's good that universities do that. I think it's good that they check your whole model. I see it in interns and in junior designers, not quite often, but it's one of the things that you almost forget at the end. And so you design something, you draw it all out, you make your groups, your components, you itemize things that way, but then people don't assign tags to it or layers, right? And so you've got a complete model, it's beautiful, but if you, like you say, if the lecturer dives one level deeper and says, in the outliner or in the layer window, can I see all the layers, has everything been correctly assigned? You notice that it hasn't. And I think real life work in a studio environment does come with certain pressures. There's a deadline for you, there's a deadline for your client, there's a deadline for the manufacturer. And the manufacturer doesn't care if it's on the right layer, right? He or she just needs to make it. And so you send them a DXF file and they start building it. And then the laser file or the laser cutter cuts that file. So yes, there are a few situations that I can think of where we have had problems because we didn't put things on certain tags or layers for a sub-supplier or a supplier who needed to subdivide the work that we had given them. And then because it wasn't on certain tags, it all ended up on tag 0 in their version of AutoCAD. So that then leads obviously to unnecessary delays. So there's room for growth there. I think that you can learn a lot in university, but at the end of the day, what truly matters to get the project over the line with the client is something that you're only really going to pick up in real life. I do believe, and I think we've done this once or twice at our university when I was studying, was a sort of form of role play. So you get a project and you are assigned a normal timeline, but then every week when you come back to a college seminar or an hour of working together as a project team, the instructor or the lecturer basically introduces a new dynamic. They say, oh, there's been a storm and your supplier couldn't deliver things to site on time, like something like that. So in that role play there are delays, and then it mimics a real life environment or a real life scenario. So that then gives you a bit more of that kind of training. Okay, so that I think finishes off section 2. And then in section 3, I want to simply ask you between SketchUp and Revit, you currently live in both of those worlds. If you're working with us and we ask you to be a dedicated resource on a project, we're asking you to do it in SketchUp. If you work with a different architect, as you are freelancing at the moment, you would be able to work for them in Revit or even in AutoCAD or whatever it is that they ask you to do, right? For us in the studio, it's mostly that we export our SketchUp work to AutoCAD for people to use with laser cutters and CNC machines. We very seldom have to convert our SketchUp files for use in Revit. But that technology SketchUp is saying is getting better and better, so the importing and exporting between the two softwares. So I think my first question to you is going to be about the way you think about the softwares. So what was the first thing that felt strange about SketchUp when you come from Revit, and that's what you were taught? And what is the first thing that felt liberating, that felt really like clever and new and fresh?
Yeah, I think like, which is something that I also mentioned to Daniels, that SketchUp was way more free compared to Revit. Like Revit, everything has to be done accurately. Like you also get like a built-in plugin for like clash detection, so you detect like what elements clash, because that also like messes up the model file. So in SketchUp, like the difference was like everything was free.
Yeah.
And everything was a lot faster to model. So I think that was what like a surprise factor for me with SketchUp, is that like you can almost like model up anything and everything. And for like a design studio like us, it's not usually has to be modeled up accurately to the T. So I think that space also like helped. Bogeni.
There you go. Good luck. Okay, so let's go back one step. So we've got a question about so section 3. So section 3 of this interview to me is the use of Revit and SketchUp. So we live in a SketchUp world, and you as a freelancer currently are working between different softwares. So you've got the ability, almost like a chameleon, to switch colors. And so sometimes you're working in Revit for a client, for an architect or a designer, and then sometimes you're using SketchUp. So what to you was like the first thing that felt strange going from Revit to SketchUp? And then what was the first time when it sort of clicked in your head, like, oh, SketchUp was designed to work this way, and that's why it is a good program in this direction? Or looking at it the other way around, oh, Revit was designed to operate like this, and this is why this works so well. So can you tell a bit about that between the two softwares?
Yeah, so like my first surprise factor with like transitioning from Revit to SketchUp was like how free SketchUp was. So like in SketchUp, you sort of like can model up anything and without having to know the physics of anything. So you can model up like literally anything on SketchUp anyhow.
Yeah.
As a beginner, you can also do it as a beginner or as a person who doesn't really know or have knowledge of the software. Compared to Revit, everything is accurate and everything is rigid. So like for example, to have like a curvy building on Revit, it takes like a lot of extensions and a lot of automations to do, and you have to have like a deeper knowledge of the software. Compared to Revit, to SketchUp, like you can almost do anything as so SketchUp was easy to learn for me. As compared to Revit, because I think SketchUp was easy to learn for me, and SketchUp has had a lot of more room for growth. I don't know if it's because I'm at a studio where I'm actually like encouraged to carry on learning and to carry on drawing and doing more with the software. I think that is part of the factors, but I think for me, SketchUp has more room for growth as compared to Revit.
Yeah. And then with Revit, it has, like you say, it has clash detection. It has a certain rigidity where it makes sure that it's accurate all the time while you're drawing. So to you, do those two comments that you made, are those the biggest advantages of Revit?
I think biggest advantages of Revit is that it almost mimics your real life environment. So I think that was the big difference with Revit, or like with ArchiCAD, which is like similar to Revit. But I think that's the big difference, and it's also with Revit, you're able to also work with other like professionals who also use the Revit software. So that kind of communication without having to change from a Revit file to a DWG and all that process was also like part of the things Revit is good at.
Yeah.
So, and also Revit has, which something SketchUp I hope does end up having, is having your sheets and everything in one software.
In one software, yeah.
So I think that was. I think
that is.
With Revit.
Understand what you're pointing towards there. And SketchUp says, you know, they don't want to do that. They want to do that in the layout software. So if you don't do the two things at the same time, in a way. I must say though, we bought a license for 5D Plus towards the end of last year. It's a developer, I think, from the Philippines or Vietnam. I don't know that exactly. And he does very regular updates. He's starting to show in SketchUp how you can draw and annotate and detail inside of the 3D model, what you're basically expecting almost inside of Revit. And I enjoy it because it gives you a whole different way of thinking about the project. But it does put the design brain and the technical refining brain all in the same place. And sometimes those two aspects are different project parts. But in a fast-moving world of exhibitions and eventing or even shop fitting, maybe it's better in the long term or in the future that those two things are combined. Yeah. So now the tool, as you describe it wins here or it wins there, and so the one is better at certain things than the others, and there's room for that obviously in the market. Now the habits that you have in Revit, or the habits that you have in SketchUp, is there like opposition between your habits? Like, does that clash sometimes? You press a certain button and you go, oh, I thought this was going to work, and now it clearly doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I usually face is that. But I think both softwares in terms of like shortcuts can be similar in some parts.
Okay.
There's also parts where, like for example, dimensioning. It's a different thing in both softwares. So it's a different shortcuts used for both software. So I think that's another thing, like I forget, oh wait, I'm not in SketchUp, I'm Revit now.
Yeah, I'm in Revit now. How do I do this? And then a word that is often used with Revit, but it is not solely exclusive to Revit, is the word BIM, Building Information Modeling. And over the decades, people have, in my mind, unfortunately made it sound extremely complex and very almost difficult to approach it, especially if you are a small, younger studio. Now, do you feel like the BIM thinking has a place in a software like SketchUp that presents itself as very design-led thinking?
Yeah, I think it does, because like I recently started like learning BIM deeper as a whole. Like the few months I've been at home, like working from home.
Yeah,
I've been like actually delving into knowing it properly, because like recently, like over the past few months, I've also been looking at BIM as like this scary difference field on its own, because they use like complex terminologies, like your PEP, you get your PEPs, your LODs, like, but when you actually get the explanations, like, oh wait, it's like simple things that you do, but it's structured properly. So like, for example, what it can be applied to the SketchUp software also. Yeah, it's not basically made. It's not, BIM is another thing that a lot of people who are in BIM have been saying, that BIM is not necessarily knowing Revit.
Yeah.
BIM is a process on its own. So
yeah, and in a good way, Revit has really made BIM its own, right? They said we will adopt it, we'll embrace it as much as we can, and some people think it's almost synonymous. When you think of Revit, you think of BIM, and you think of BIM, you think of Revit. The other thing that we don't use that often in the SketchUp environment, but I can see the technology is driving towards it. It's the IFC standard, and I think it's something like the International Federation for Construction or International Information for Construction. I'll look it up and put it in the description of the video. But IFC is also synonymous with Revit, and I don't know if in Revit you often see it, but the nice thing is you can export and import via IFC in between SketchUp and Revit. So and as long as you
ArchiCAD, it also works,
with also IFC, So see, that's apparently and I say that apparently, we don't have to use IFC in our shop fitting or in our exhibition environment, and we can define everything as walls, columns, floors, doors, and then the detail of the decoration, right, the shelving and the lighting. What I do find interesting as well is he described LOD, so level of detail for people that are new to this. The LOD that you see in SketchUp often is that you design something in block models. So you just draw a block and you say this is now a chair, and later on in the process I'll detail it, I'll define it further. And so you're always operating in LOD 100. Like that's generally what you start with in SketchUp. And then you go quite quickly into LOD 300, but we don't really go into LOD 400 where you draw every single nut and screw. So that kind of thinking is to me is also interesting, that you design something very structurally and very process wise, like you say in Revit, and in SketchUp we somehow jump between LOD 100 and 300 really quickly, and that is oftentimes to get a design detail right. So you say, okay, I want a certain light hanging in the ceiling, and then you immediately download an asset from the 3D warehouse that is essentially LOD 300.
Yeah.
But no one is asking you for that or telling you that it needs to be that, right? And sometimes you download a light cone and it really is a cylindrical shape with an offset line, and there's like a 2 millimeter thickness difference, and you can paint the outer shell aluminium and the inner shell is the illuminated surface for the render engine. It's basically LOD 100 and a little bit, right? It's barely LOD 200, but it's playing with that. And it's not wanting to be too precise, because I don't even think that people in the 3D warehouse often model with that knowledge, right? They're just trying to make the fire hydrant or the street light look as realistic as possible, because you're trying to model in SketchUp oftentimes visually. I think that Owethu is enough for section. Everything that we've discussed up to this point, as you've described, a lot of the things you learned at university, you could apply it at a studio or at an architectural design firm. You anticipated that it was part of your role, and you felt prepared for it through what you had learned at the university. And then, as you described, in the last month of interning with us, you got to experience quite a lot of the AI softwares. And one of the key things that you were working with us was the ability to tell the AI to draw something for you instead of you and I drawing it ourselves. And SketchUp is probably on the forefront of that compared to other softwares. We see a lot of design software at the moment is focusing heavily on creating the visuals. Take a relatively simple model and then dress it up as if it is a render. And it's a huge time saver, and it is frankly a lot of fun to use that kind of software and see within a minute, right, an almost finished image with reflections and soft shading and people walking through the space. It really feels like you're there, and it has almost been built. And so that exploration of conceptual design thinking and coming up with design style variations through those renders becomes really interesting, becomes really in depth, because you're getting a lot of feedback that looks realistic using those render engines. Now, what I want to focus on with you is this AI research that you did, right? SketchUp is testing features that allows you to draw by simply speak to text or type text. And then as you say to the computer, I want to design a counter, and it has a certain countertop thickness, and it has a certain kick plate depth or height, and it has rounding on the edges of the counter. Then SketchUp takes that information from you, and it uses a scripting language or a coding language called Ruby. So it uses the Ruby console inside of SketchUp, and you paste that code from your AI into SketchUp, and then it uses the code to build your object. So let's start at the beginning of that. So you had a role that leans towards research and AI in the last month that you were here, and this was to fast track your workflow rather than simply completing your workflow by creating a render. So the automation that you were building or testing, what of that actually stuck in your brain, or you felt stuck with us as a team?
I think
like where was this becoming usable?
Yeah, I think like with AI, like would sometimes like do like your strips differently. Like this one I also like had in my mind to actually at least understand a bit of the coding language, so I know like the patterns of how, like if you structure it this way, it works out like how you want, compared to structure it another way.
Yes.
So like I was also trying to keep that and document that for myself as to sort of help me out in the future. So I think that would help in the early stages of the design, so you don't end up spending like 2 hours on something that wouldn't work out. So it's another thing that we were looking at with Mbongeni, the white messing, the white boxing. So which I thought was also like pretty beneficial, because it's that you basically like you figure out if something works before you model up and waste so much time. So, I think.
So to enhance that point a little bit for the viewer is when you start designing, especially a retail space, sometimes you're using white boxing as a technique, and the white boxing is taking the shape of the store, the footprint, and immediately placing all the furniture to the sizes that you know inside of it to consider what the flow through the store would be. And so that process doesn't have to be a long process. So if you draw out enough columns and squares and rectangles and cubes, you've got enough shapes and sizes to augment the idea that there's a counter, a freestanding shelf, a gondola, and a wall bay, you name it. And by filling that information in then early, you get a sense of the flow through the space, and have we tried to put too many shelves in a small store? But at the same time, as you are now reiterating to me, you're saying that is an interesting process to do, but to create 10 or 100 variations to try and fit it as puzzle pieces together, you could also ask the AI, right? You could also tell the AI to go do that for me. And that, like you said, that's been a wonderful way of using the software. So another thing would be to look at it from the opposite direction, and that is to ask, that AI experiment worked quite well. Sometimes drawing out an object worked really well, but what was one of the things that you tried in AI that you halfway through or towards the end realized, this is just not working, like the technology isn't that good yet, or we might get there in the future, but it doesn't help us actually?
I think I did like get frustrated with that a lot, because like one day it will work out the way that I want it to work out, but I didn't save the script. So the next day I want to make the same type of counter but different size. So I would just need to like change the dimensions or change the sizes, but then I didn't save the scripts in the first place, and then I asked AI with the same prompts, but it gives me something else that's different. So I think
so. The prompt variations, they differed quite a bit, and that had an effect on the outcome. Yeah, I noticed it myself as well in the AI rendering environment quite a bit. I also sometimes notice that if you save the script, like what you should have done or what you realized you should have done, you do tend to come up short later on when the script is structured a specific way. But then because the software has updated itself to a new version, the structure of that script no longer applies to the new version, and you need to rewrite that script. And I think we're hitting a natural barrier, right? In that in the past or in the real professional working world of coding, you don't code once and then it's done. You code to start, and then you code to adapt to the latest release of a specific software or a specific OS, and then you keep updating that piece of software to be in sync with the rest of the market. And that's of course something that we have never really had to do, because as designers, you design something and then it gets built. That's the end of the story. Or maybe there's maintenance, right? You need to repair or fix something. But what we're now experiencing is, like coders, you are updating software over and over again to keep it functional in the ever-changing software landscape. So the time that you joined our studio and started interning with us, the time that you graduated, around that time AI started to come more and more to the forefront of what was possible using it. So for you, what is AI? Is it an advantage to you as you do your work? Is it something that's like a moving target and you're always trying to catch up with it? Or do you feel like it's there to steal your job?
I think if you use it properly, it is an advantage, because like, for example, with like one of our projects, it did like fasten the workflow a lot, rather than doing every component as like placing every component on the table individually to see if it fits. You rather use AI, so it's basically cuts down the time that you use. And it makes things faster to know that this won't work out before you actually like spend like 2 hours modeling out. So so you're quite right in saying that sometimes drawing something by hand and creating a structure is really engaging, and it helps the design process. And then as soon as you enter that sort of next step where you go, okay, I've drawn this, but now I need to draw it 100 times to give the model, to give the store the feeling that it's full of product, is actually now a waste of my time, because it'll matter for the render. The render needs to look a certain way. It needs to look like it's full of unique products. But for me to create 100 unique models of different products is going to take a few days. It's simply too long a task to do, but not in the age of AI. Because now you give it something like an Excel sheet or maybe even a website web shop, and you say, from this environment, pull those 100 products and draw them out for me, right? And then it does it in a couple of minutes or maybe half an hour. And then you have achieved something that would normally take you a few days. So to you it is an advantage. How would you speak to people who see it as something that threatens their work, their position? Because you've been able to learn with it on the job, but you've also said you've learned to use it outside of your work, and it has pushed you, it has in a sense almost optimistically encouraged you to engage with it, to learn beyond your day-to-day work, right? So you've become interested beyond your normal tasks. How can you give someone that same encouragement when they feel like it's out there to get them? I think just trying it out like really helps a lot. Like being open to trying new things out. Like
Yeah.
same thing for myself. Like I could have been like stubborn and say I'm a Revit user.
Yeah.
I won't use SketchUp, but here I am now because I actually like tried out something and it actually worked out pretty good. So I think we should also have like the same mentality in AI and the use of AI, because it's only going to keep improving and going up from now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, agreed.
I think catching the wave now will like help a lot going on to the future. So
yeah, and it's not to say that there aren't more waves to come. Like this won't be the last wave of AI or the last wave of software development and upgrading. So I think there's a lot, like you said, that can be learned from this. What I want to focus on with you now is something that we touched on briefly, but it was very invigorating for both of us, and it was a new technology that we both got to experience in its first few months. So I'm going to take us back a little bit to December 2025, where I worked on a project with the agency Jawbone, and they had won some work on behalf of another agency for Jameson. And so Jameson was going to do a distillery on tour. They were going to do this in Cape Town, and they were going to use the Castle of Good Hope for this. And that was the first time that I felt really convicted to use a 3D scanner, a LiDAR scanner, a SLAM scanner, to document as much of the place, the castle itself, to then use in our 3D models in SketchUp. Because there is, unfortunately, of a castle from 1600, there's not a DWG file or a Revit file or a floor plan set to modern standards. Even though there's documentation, it's not quite what you need for large-scale eventing where things can change on the fly. So we used a XGRIDS Lixel L2 Pro and a K1 scanner, and we scanned that whole building. And then in the time that you were here, for the 3 months that you were with us, they released the K2, right? And you saw us getting excited for that. And then we did a demonstration outside of the office in the garden behind us, and I showed you how to use that scanner and what it records, what data it then gives us into SketchUp. So section 5, we're talking about reality capture from a junior's seat, so from your position. So when you joined the studio, the scans that we had, like the Jameson scan and the scan of Incredible Connection, those scans we were using, and we were using the Gaussian splats specifically inside of our designs. As someone who hadn't been to those site visits, right, who saw those Gaussian splats for the first time, what does having a captured site change for you in your day-to-day work when you're drawing?
Yeah, I think it helped a lot. Like it was sort of like a surprise factor for me, because it was like I came from modeling from like maps and from like a street viewer on maps, and like trying to match it out and to scale just to give context to what I'm designing, because it's what we actually were briefed by clients to having a way to capture everything and then put it into your software and
just have it there.
Just have it there. In so it was like a really, really exciting thing from my side, because I'm also like, I'm a person who's open to these kind of things, to learning these kind of things, and I'm a person who is supportive of the growth of this workflow, this kind of workflow.
Yeah, it's true. There's an excitement. There's like an eye-opening moment when you first see it. You can't quite believe that this technology exists at this point. And then the ease of use, because the models aren't really heavy. You can optimize them quite effectively. Allows you to draw really at the same speed that you were used to, with that context now available. And like you highlighted, previously you were meshing and drawing to scale as best as you could with site context to give the client some visual context, right? And now with one scan, it's all there. So when you saw myself taking the scan and then loading it for the first time onto the computer, and we opened it up, what went through your head when you saw that in front of you?
Whoa.
Whoa. Yeah.
It was quite exciting, to be honest. Even seeing the Jameson project was also quite a chance to see that. It was like a really big eye-opener, because to have that kind of technology with us, and we're still having to model out you're still having like firms modeling out everything. So I think going on to the future, this kind of technology will be more relevant. But I think it is a dope thing to have, and it is like good that we're experimenting now while still at the beginning phase of it.
This, you're quite right. This feels, especially for SketchUp users, this feels like the first wave. And if you catch it now, brownie point for being able to say, I caught the first wave. And at the same time, it's still early enough to walk up to this technology and say, okay, I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to see what it is about. I'm going to start using it. And it is really an expensive tool to use when it comes to the scanners. But then when I showed you on your phone that you can use the Scaniverse app as an example, right? Then you can practice with it at home, out there in the world, or sitting at a restaurant around the table, right? You can just test this thing out. So now the splat and the point cloud, they can get pulled into SketchUp to draw on top of them or inside of them. How does that compare at the moment to Revit? Has Revit adopted this kind of technology as well?
Yeah, I think there is scan to BIM workflow in Revit, although I haven't had the chance to try it out. Yeah, but I think there is, although I'm not quite sure, but I've heard people trying it out.
Because what I understood from people who use it, when we work with Ingenuity in Gateway, they use it quite well, or not well. They use it very often. They are well aware of it, and they say that in the use case of Revit, like from a user interface point of view, in SketchUp, of course, everything sits in one environment. Yeah. And in Revit, you've got two windows. So you've got your normal drawing environment, and then you've got your drawing environment plus the Revit, not the Revit, plus the point cloud scan. And so then the two overlap or sit on top of each other. So you keep drawing in your normal environment, but you can see next to it how it correlates. Which in SketchUp it feels almost a little bit more intuitive, that it just sits on top of each other and it's right there. We've covered 5 sections, right from the start of when you joined our studio for your intern time, and we went right till the end where you start to experiment with new technology as it's happening in the here and the now. In this last section 6, I want to ask you a little bit more about the advice and your next steps in your life. So really not wanting to speak about our studio. We've done that certainly enough. This is really about you. So you've said the key in finding your branch of work and you're growing from that branch, if we can sort of stick to the analogy of a tree, is how did you find your branch? How did you find your sort of specialism or your passion and your talent in all the things that you can do in architecture? And how would you encourage other students to find the thing that they're most passionate about, or the thing that they would consider their specialism?
I think just being open to trying out new things, like having the curiosity and the mindset to try it out. But you never know what actually might fit you. Yeah. So I think trying out new things and like new ways of doing stuff in architecture as a whole, or like in design itself as a whole, like really helps a lot. So be open to trying out new things, be open to experimenting, be open to not only like maybe let's say you're using Revit, not only use the software when you have, let's say, a school brief, or you have to use it at that point, but on your time and with your own pace, like spend some time experimenting with the softwares.
Yeah. I
think it also helped me out.
Yeah, so experimenting and curiosity is almost like the main driver of that. And I think also in our studio there's a lot of space for that, because the office that we're sitting in, we internally call it a little bit like the mad professor office or the mad scientist environment, right? You've got a lot of tools here, like the vinyl cutter, the books from this year all the way back to decades and decades ago of old material. There's cutting mats, a 3D printer, there's quite a few things that you can play around with. And at the same time, the world is moving far more digital when it comes to all the things that we're experimenting with than necessarily the analog, the hardware kind of tool. So for someone like yourself who started in design and is experimenting with AI and is a bit of a sort of mad scientist yourself when it comes to the use of AI for drawing things for you, how do you look at someone, or how do you help a student who says they're hesitant to become heavily involved in the software instead of being a true conceptual designer? Because you feel you've in a sense gone from being a core conceptual thinking designer into a very software driven, I need to know how this works kind of designer, right? So someone might say you've become less of an architect and you've become more of an architectural technologist. Yeah. And for you that transition has felt natural, but how would you encourage someone who feels like it feels like they're giving up on being an actual architect, on being a designer?
I think it goes back to the point of trying out new things, because even in architecture as a whole, or in design as a whole, there's like a lot of alternatives that you can go into. So it's not only the technology side, or it's not only the BIM and the conceptual design side. There's more onto it. So like just experimenting, and you eventually find out what is yours, what is meant for you, what is meant for you to be in. So I think being open-minded comes with a lot of benefit to you. So I think
And do you now feel like you've lost some of that core conceptual thinking now that you focus more on software? Because I think that would be one of the fears that people have, right? Because they started out thinking, I'm going to be a extremely conceptual thinking, designing person. That's why I'm going to varsity. And you, in a sense, have almost ended up being a software-driven specialist.
Yeah, it does come with that, but you can only have so much designers. That's the thing. That's the reality of the world we live in. You can only have so much people who design and so much people who create concepts, which I think is also the issue currently with the architectural field, is that we have a lot of design-driven people and not so much of software and not so much of BIM-minded people. So
the how-to people are not as they're not as vast in their quantities. Their availability is lower. That's a very good point. Now, in line with that, you've got that software role, and so what are you deliberately nurturing right now? Like, what are you focused on, and how do you feel that prepares you for your next role, or let's say the next 2 years?
Yeah, I think getting more knowledge of the software, like getting more ways on how to fasten your workflow, is what I'm like. I leave aside like 2 hours of my day to learn the software as the software itself, not actually like doing a project. So I think going on to the future, I just wanna know more of softwares as a whole, not just Revit and SketchUp. I wanna be diverse and learning more of also like the use of Meshy AI and hidden 3D. Yeah, I think having that knowledge also comes with benefit because you can make a 3D objects of an image. So I think that's also like was quite dope thing for me to see. I think going on to the future, just experimenting, having the correct mindset to learn and carry on learning.
And like you say, the experimentation reminds me personally about like a playground, like a sandbox. And when we introduce people to our studio, we show them an image of a sandcastle, right? And I explain things like, when I was a kid, I used to make sandcastles. And I think there's something that sometimes gets lost in a larger firm or in a firm that has a lot of processes and regulations. That, to your point, if you can set aside a quarter of your day and you can experiment and you can use it like a sandbox experience, then you can learn a lot more and experiment a lot more than in any other way. And that to me, is probably such a good reminder that experimenting is like playing. And a lot of work is unfortunately not playful or not playing. And so we need to be a bit guarded, or we need to be on our guard to ensure that we leave some time and some space for playfulness. And that in that playing, we can experiment with the latest, the greatest, the newest technology or tools. And then from what we learn in that, we can then come up with new ways of working. Owethu, for the next person that wants to work at our studio, and for us to host that person as an intern, what does it look like for us to do better for the next intern? What advice would you give us as a team?
I think it's also what some points like you also can't control was not briefing, the briefing not being quite, not being quite detailed. So like, as an intern or as a person who's not used to this kind of space, and let's say maybe like a Tanil or like a Mongeni is used to that kind of briefing. Like as a person who comes from a school where like the brief is detailed, and you come in here and then it's like a 4-liner. It was also what was difficult for me, and I think it's also something that you are improving is the library. I think that was also like another issue for me when I came here, was that everything was almost everywhere. And I agree with you. We as a studio, we are very thin on standard operating procedures. We don't necessarily shy away from process, but we often have a process that is accustomed to the specific people working here. So then when you come here as a new person and you get an instruction that is 4 lines, like go to this project, pull that data out, use it as a template for this new project. It feels so flexible and loose that you get a little bit lost. And so we as a studio, as Owethu is highlighting, we use software like Trello, Jibble. We use an SOP platform that's developed by an AI, so that you can have a knowledge base and you can pull information out. And so slowly but surely we're standardizing those things so that, like you say, the next intern can also be onboarded and can open that knowledge base and go, oh, that's the way we're doing this, and that's why they're briefing me with an introduction, and they're briefing me with steps and bullet points and all the detail. But behind that sits a whole way of thinking. So thank you, Owethu, for your time and your advice, and thank you for each and every answer in the sections that we've spoken about. And I wish you
a good 2026, whatever's left of it. And I look forward to hearing about your journey in Revit and SketchUp.
Thank you.
Thank you.